You're listening to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor, powered by bbbgive.org. Here we explore the motivations that form the basis of giving and service. We inspire generosity and celebrate the transformative effects that giving and service have on the human spirit and on community. The conversations featured on the podcast also uncover giving strategies that educate and provide tools to help listeners make impactful gifts of both their time and money. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome to the Heart of Giving podcast, powered by bbbgive.org. Give.org is the nation's standards-based charity evaluator and your one-stop source for information on giving and reports on the most asked about charities. I'm Art Taylor, your host. And with me today is one of my boyhood idols, Kevin Washington, who is the CEO of the YMCA of USA. And what's so interesting about Kevin, among the things that's interesting about him, is that he learned how to play basketball at the Y, went off to play basketball, came back from playing basketball, got a job at the Y, and has never really worked anywhere else. He's had stints where he led a Y in Philadelphia. He led a Y, I believe, in Hartford. He led another Y in Boston. He was, I think, a co-director of the Y in Chicago. And now he is the CEO of the YMCA USA. And I have to tell you, and you'll find out from this interview just how impressive that is, because Kevin grew up like me we grew up in the same neighborhood, basically. And not very many of us can say we're CEOs of anything. And there are probably more of us who were killed or more of us who landed in prison than there are numbers of us who actually lead organizations. And that's a terrible thing to have to say, but it's probably the truth. So for me to sit here today and say Kevin Washington is the CEO of anything is a powerful statement. And to say that he is the CEO of, what is it, a $2-3 billion organization? The Y? It's a $5 billion. What is it, Kevin?
8.4.
$8.4 billion organization is saying something. So let's get into this a little bit, because I want people to really understand who Kevin Washington is and where he came from. So Kevin, I think I connected with you when I was about maybe 11 years old.
Yeah, but that sounds about right.
Yeah, but by that time, you had already been in the Y for many years. How did you get connected to the Y as a boy?
Yeah. Artie, it's so interesting you tell a story, because you and I both know the neighborhoods we grew up in. I was fortunate, as you were, to be at the Christian Street Y because of Bill Morton. Bill Morton was a youth director in South Philadelphia who cared about people like you and I, Artie. And he wanted to ensure that we got the kind of support that we needed to cross that ever tough bridge, if you will, from adolescence to adulthood. And Bill Morton, who's my mentor until he died, God rest his soul, just was a sweet, soulful young man who cared about Black kids. And he got me started in the Y, got me to understand what volunteering was about, helped me get my jump shot better, and created a path for me to get a scholarship to Temple University. And after that, he gave me my first job back at that Christian Street YMCA that we all in South Philly knew and understood how it affected our lives. So that's my story.
What about that Y, though? Tell us about the Christian Street Y.
The Christian Street Y was we used to call it the littlest, biggest Y in the world, because everybody of color who was somebody in the city of Philadelphia was attached to that YMCA. We can talk about William S. Gray, and his father was attached to that Y. Judge King, Zach Taylor, all these names, Wilt Chamberlain. Everybody who grew up in South Philly, and more importantly, leaders in the city, were part of that YMCA. Wilson Good came out of that YMCA as the first Black mayor of Philadelphia, because of the Black Political Forum that used to meet at that YMCA. You know this name, Tick Coleman.
Yeah.
Who got so many young folks in South Philadelphia, who a Lincoln grad, he worked to get folks in college, help them get applications. He would be there every Monday and Wednesday nights, work with young people. Christian Street YMCA in that community was the leader in developing young talent to ensure that they met their full potential. And all of us revelate in Christian Street. And the other people, as you know, Artie, that did not get the kind of publicity. Kenneth Woods, who we'll know as Peanut.
Yep.
I thought Peanut worked there all the time. He was a fireman, but he volunteered there all the time.
That's
Chief
amazing.
Hunter, Ivan Wallace, all these folks who cared about young folks coming up, particularly young Black boys in that city. Christian Street was the place that was a part of us and still is a part of our heritage. So,
but you know what's so amazing, Kevin? I never paid a dime to go to the Y.
Isn't that the truth? None of us did. Well, first of all, Artie, we didn't have too many dimes at that point.
That's true. That's true.
But the reason why we didn't pay because Christian Street, because of so many of the leaders in the city who had lawyers and doctors and union leaders, raised money to ensure that you and I didn't have to pay a dime to go there. But they wanted to make sure that Y was there for us. So that volunteer engagement and that fundraising aspect that helped do it made sure that Y was there and possible to support many of us. I will never forget that experience. It stays with me, and it has shaped me in how I think about what organizations, not only like the Y, but other organizations can do to transform communities and young people to help them reach their potential.
Yeah, I mean, boy, that Y was everything. And you talk about we didn't have a lot of dimes. I remember I had like a 6-block walk from my house to the Y. Not a very long walk, 6 blocks. But whenever I got to block number 5, which was Carpenter Street, there was this guy standing out on 17th and Carpenter Street asking me for money. And he wasn't asking in a nice way, right? He'd say, give me a quarter. And I'd tell him, I don't have it. Let me check your pockets. You can't check my pockets. I don't have it. And so, that was one of the few things I hated about our neighborhood was that you have to walk by people like this who would challenge you just to keep what you had. People don't understand what we were dealing with at the time.
All I can find, I can have.
Yeah, all I can find, I can have.
All I can find, I can keep. Right.
Yep.
So the question was, how fast could you run to get to the Y, right?
Right. So we had gangs. There were like 4 or 5 different gangs in our area that we had to deal with, right? Yeah. But when we got to the Y, it was a whole different thing. Talk about that.
Yeah, it was Climber Street, you had Carpenter Street, you had Titan Street. I mean, they were all over there.
Right.
But when you got to the Y, everybody was equal. They made sure that was that protective hub for all of us to engage in the activities in which we went. And folks cared about it. And there was a certain behavior that you had to adhere to to be in the Y. You could be the toughest guy on the corner, beating everybody up, the big fish in the pond outside. But when you came into the Y, hats off, no cursing. If you caught you doing anything wrong, you were out, and no one wanted to get put out of the Y. And so everybody adhered to the rules and regulations to ensure that they could stay in there because they didn't take no stuff.
Absolutely. So you came up as a basketball player, and one of the questions I always wanted to ask is, how was it that you ended up at Overbrook High School, which is like... Overbrook is like miles and miles away from South Philly. You probably had to take 2 buses and a subway. I mean,
that's right.
To get to Overbrook. You had to leave your house probably 2 hours early to get there on time. How did you end up at Overbrook? And by the way, I hear you weren't the only one. Other guys like, Andre McCarter, your teammate, South Philly guy. Other guys ended up going to other schools rather than going to our neighborhood school, Southern High.
Southern High, yeah.
What's the story behind that? Because I went to Southern and it worked out for me, but you guys obviously felt it wasn't the place for you to go.
That's a great question, Artie, because all of my brothers and sisters, with the exception of my younger sister, all went to South Philadelphia High School. I didn't go to South Philly for a reason that was other than sports. And when I left Barrett Junior High School in 1968, there was a program called the Scholars Program that recruited kids from all over the city to go to Overbrook High School. I happened to be at that time a fairly decent student. And I think 3 of our folks, maybe 4 people from Barrett Junior High, it was me, Edgar Abbott, Novella Washington, and I think another other lady. All 4 of us were recruited through the Scholars Program to go to Overbrook High School. So rather than, Central was the place where all the boys went,
right,
and Girls High was where all the smart girls went. But they created this program at Overbrook High School to attract people. It wasn't a magnet program, but it was a scholars program similar to the Magnus program. And they took kids from all over the country. So you had to have a certain level of testing to get in. It just so happened that going to Overbrook High School, because they had a great basketball tradition too, the two came together. So that's how I got to Overbrook High School. It was through the Magnus Scholars Program.
Fantastic.
I was a decent student at that time.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand how that goes too. So listen to this, Kevin. People don't understand the significance of basketball in South Philadelphia. How do you explain it? How do you help people understand that that's what we did?
It's hard, Arnie, because it seems today we're in 2020. But what we did in the 60s and 70s, probably up until the 80s for the most part, we played basketball. And I played basketball every day when I was 11 and 12, 13, 14, even in the winter. We would shovel the court off snow and play basketball in the schoolyards. And there was an attraction to basketball. We would go all over the neighborhood. I'd go to Landry, we go to Barrett, we go to Durham. We played basketball in the schoolyard. Basketball it was a way of life, but it was also a socialization opportunity too, to get to meet people from all over the country, from all over the neighborhood. And the other thing that it did was that if you played basketball and the gangsters knew you, they knew you did, they would usually leave you alone because you're back. Leave Artie alone. Leave Kevin alone. He's a ball player, man. He play ball. He don't mess with nobody. Right. And then you had these individuals. And one of them you and I both know, Bill Burry.
Yeah.
Who started the Bill Burry League, and we played in the summer league there. It was a way of life. It was how we socialized. It's how we connected. It's what kept us out of trouble. And we played in the schoolyards every day. Basketball was a way of life for us. And I can seriously say, I probably played basketball every day from age 11 to probably 30. I mean, every day.
Right. I understand.
Yeah. And sometimes twice on Sunday, right? You play all the time. And don't lose. When you're playing in a schoolyard, the goal was don't lose. Because if you lose, right, you're going to sit down for a while. So you made sure you got the best team possible and you played all the, yeah. Basketball was just a way of life. And I think it's hard because people today is very different because I think it's so socialized and organized. We didn't have AAU where you going all over the country to play. We played collectively together in the schoolyards and neighborhoods in Philadelphia, all over. Yeah. Very different.
Well, that's so interesting because it was a way of life. It was our sort of ticket out, and I followed you. I watched you go from being a city champion at Overbrook to then going to Temple and having the chance to play with Coach Litwack, And tell them, people don't know, this audience may not know Harry Litwack, but talk about
Harry Litwack. Harry Litwack is a Hall of Fame coach who coached at Temple for probably 40 years. He played there in the early 20s and then became coach. And he coached me and he coached the 1969, our only claim to fame, at least a championship. He coached the 1969 team that won the NIT championship. But Harry Litwack was a great guy. He was not only a fantastic coach, he was a better human being because he cared about his players. He made sure that they got to school, that they did the work they needed to do to graduate. And even if they needed additional time and efforts, he made sure that happened. Hall of Fame coach was also a Hall of Fame human being who I enjoyed playing with for the year or two that I played with him. And then he retired. We had another coach, Coach Casey, came after that, Mr. Litwack. But Hall of Fame coach came to my house to recruit me. My mom and dad were sitting in chairs when he came in. Used to smoke those big cigars, but he was a class act. and a gentleman for all sorts, and one who I had the utmost respect for and the great opportunity to learn from and play with at that great university, at Temple University. And I got there because of the why.
Yeah.
I got there because of the why.
Now, don't worry, everybody. We're going to get into the why stuff and management. In fact, this is going to be a segue question for that. Mm-hmm. So what would you say you learned from Coach Litwack that has maybe influenced you as a leader?
Great question. All right, that is a great question. What I learned from Mr. Litwack was that everybody on the team is important. I don't care where you were in the lineup, whether you were the first man or the 12th man, that everybody on that team is important and essential to the goals that you're trying to achieve. He used to have a phrase that I always remember. He would say, when we win, we all go downtown together. And in my leadership style, I recognize that everybody, wherever you are in the organization, is a key component to us reaching our goals and objectives. And the other thing you learn is that you can learn from anyone in the organization. You just have to be open to listening. I learned that from Mr. Litwack. He was patient, he was decisive, but he didn't rule by fiat. He was just such a magnanimous figure, but also recognizing that it took all of us. In practice, he would say, look, I don't care where you are, you got to push the first team hard so they can be better prepared to take on the challenges of the opponent. So he really, really, really believed in the philosophy that everybody, no matter where you were part of this team's success. And that particular trait is what I've taken mostly from him as I've done the leadership that I've had to do in my YMCA career and my leadership career.
So the why was really able to bring you along. You started out, I believe, as one of the executive directors in one of the Philly Ys, which was the Columbia North Y, right?
Correct.
Was that the first one that you actually headed?
That is the first Y I headed, the Columbia North Branch YMCA on Broad and Master, right down the street from Temple, where I used to go to school. So It was really like going back home in a sense.
And it was Bill Morton from the Christian Street Y who helped you land there.
He absolutely did. I was at the YMCA Christian Street for 3 years under him. And when the Columbia North Branch position came open, he encouraged me to apply. While he didn't want to lose me, but he also understood that he would never stand in the way of an opportunity for progress. And he encouraged me to apply for that job.
Now, there's a lesson right there. Leaders should be people who want to develop talent, who want to see others get past what they got,
Exactly.
And I can't imagine Bill ever thought you'd be the head of all the Y. He could not have envisioned, first of all, he couldn't have envisioned a Black person, period, being head of the Y. He could not have envisioned that when you came along.
No.
But today, I just know he would be so proud. To him, it would be like a Barack Obama moment because he invested so much of his life in the Y. And to have you there now, it would have been just kind of an amazing thing, as it has been for all of us. So, Kevin, you've moved around quite a bit. You learned a lot. And this opportunity came for you to head the YMCA USA. And I guess the question I have for you is, what did you find when you landed in that role? And what were some of the surprises maybe that you found when you came to the Y? What was the state of things when you got
That's a good question. I was fortunate, quite frankly, Artie, because my predecessor, Neil Nickel, who came from the Seattle YMCAs prior to coming to YUSA, I really did a good job of positioning the organization. He inherited some very difficult things that he had an opportunity to, I would say, move in another direction. So I inherited a YMCA that was strong, but braced for change. And I saw my opportunity or my role is to continue to move the YMCA in a very focused direction around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And while that was going to be significant, a challenge, but the timing and the opportunity was right for us. We needed to do that. We needed to be seen as a much more responsive organization, association, particularly as it relates to communities of color, vulnerable communities, people from LGBTQ community. We needed to be seen as equitable for all. And we had the opportunity to build upon that.
So what are some of the things that you began to do to sort of drive that agenda?
Well, when I first went in, we looked at, and let's be clear, while the Y, and I sit here and tell you this because I benefited from it, is a great institution. We've been around since 1851. And what I say all the time, Artie, is we are a reflection of America as an institution. We have all the warts and the great things about our country, but we have some history, some history that I would say doesn't put us all in the positive light. I mean, we had separate wives. We had black wives. We had white wives. We didn't have women come into our organization early. So there was some history in our organization. And then our representation wasn't as great in the upper echelons of the organization. So we had some things that we needed to do. So that was part of what I wanted to make sure happened. The first thing I did from an equity, a diversity and inclusion perspective is I had a diversity and inclusion person who was reporting to, I think, the chief operating officer, maybe the HR person. But I immediately said, no, if we're going to do this right, she needs to report directly to me so that we can ensure when she stepped out and talked, she was taking my agenda and people recognized that she was reporting to me. So that was one of the first things I did to ensure that people understood that this was going to be a priority of the organization. And the other thing I did, I went out on the road and talked to a lot of folks about where we are and what we don't want to do. And we started measuring how we wanted to move. I mean, we wanted to make sure that people understood that this was an important aspect of what we wanted to do organizationally and that we're going to measure that as from a standpoint. And more importantly, we wanted to mirror. YUSA wanted to mirror what we wanted to see happen across. So our staff, our boards, and how we did our work was reflective in what we wanted the organization to look like collectively. Now recognize we are a federation. So the ability to be forceful in this process doesn't exist because we have very little legal perspective to do that. Although we do have some qualifications that you have to adhere to carry the Y brand. So we strengthen those so that we can make those standards stronger for people to be a part of our organization.
Yeah. So what were some of the things you had to do organizationally from a structural standpoint to drive that kind of change? Because as you said, a federation has its challenges. I led a federation and it can be a challenge to.
It can be a challenge.
They're not going to take top down,
No.
instruction without some significant input and pushback sometimes. So
exactly.
You had to deal with it. However
you got to deal with it. You do it through persuasion and influence. But some of the things we did, one, we raised the standards on some areas around diversity and inclusion. We wanted to make sure that that was a key issue, non-discriminatory. We pushed that in. We created these employee resource groups across the country so that we gave a broader opportunity for all, and it was 6 of them, African-American, Hispanic, Latino, Asian, LGBTQ, women. We recreated these groups across the country because we wanted to get those voices up in the organization. That was a key. Then we increased the training for that around diversity, inclusion, and equity. We created some specific programs and processes around training to ensure that our leadership would be in place to ensure that they understood the kinds of things we wanted them to be thinking about as they rose to the leadership perspective. So all of those things, training was a big part of it. The ARNG group, employee resource groups across the country, and modeling the behavior at the national organization that we wanted. So we did some work on our board. We really put forth how we want to make our board look like America or look like the organization we want to be. And all of my staff was that way. I have a diverse staff, women, all that was part of that reported directly to me. And we held ourselves accountable to those things. We wanted to make sure YUSA reflected what we wanted the organization to look like. And that was the process we put in place to ensure that we were moving down this diversity and equity path. And one of the things I said and clearly articulated often was that here we are as an organization and as a community, we recognize that everybody's not in the same place. Particularly when you look at our country, everybody's not in the same place. But what we want to do from a training perspective is meet you where you are, and help and support you moving forward. I mean, that was the process that I use, and I talk about that. I still talk about that today when I talk to groups. Everybody's not at the same place, but we're going to meet you where you are and help and support you moving down this path through training, acknowledgement, and support. That's how we do it collectively.
You know, that's an interesting one because when I have these conversations with people, I say that I usually come across 4 different kinds of people.
Mm-hmm.
There are those who think everything is fine. There's nothing wrong with the country. What are you talking about? There's no racism or discrimination in the country. People just need to be Americans. Okay, that's one group. Then you have people who they believe that there is racism, but that is individual. If they're just some people who act that way, and you just need to deal with them directly. But there's no systemic issue going on. Then there are people who believe that there's systemic racism or structural racism in the country to go along with the individual stuff, and that somehow that needs to be dealt with. It's wrong and it's unfair, but it's not likely that it's going to change. Mm-hmm. And then there are other people who believe that there is structural, systemic, and individual racism, and it needs to change now. So you're going to have all types of people, and within each of those groupings, you're going to find people at different places as well. And in a federation like yours, which is, I don't know, what are we talking about, first of all, in terms of number of Ys and locations, and what are we talking about?
We have, in the federation, as you know, we have 798 associations in that federation, 2,700 physical locations, YMCAs, and we're in 10,000 communities across the country, and we have 22 million members as part of that federation. So it's broad, deep, and wide in every sense of the word, and probably reflective of all 4, if not even a 5th one, of the particular issues that you just described.
Yeah, so you're not just going to come up with one thing and drive everybody to agreement. So
no.
Now, given that mandate, though, I suspect you try to figure out what progress looks like. So yes. What does success or progress look like? And what have you guys, and women for that matter, come up with to sort of say we're being successful, or we're sliding back, or what is it exactly that you guys are actually trying to achieve at the Y?
That's a good point. We have a diversity and inclusion metric that we use to look at YMCAs.
Yeah.
And it's not only through a lens of color, but it's a lens of, I'm looking at the community you serve.
Right.
Taking the metrics of that community and saying, are the people you engaging reflective of the community in which you're in, right? That's one metric that we use, because that tells me that if it matches or if it surpasses it, then I know what it's saying to us, that you're using all of your knowledge and perspective to engage in that community in a way, shape, and form. So that's an important metric, aside from the stuff around how many people have been going through the training around D&I, how many have gone through that training, or do you have trainers on staff? Is your board going through it? Those are the other kinds of metrics that we look at, because the training brings about the awareness, and the awareness, hopefully, cross your fingers, gets you to act, right? You can't act until you know where you are, right? You gotta confront the facts and say, oh man, we got a community of 22% of Hispanic that we're not even engaging. What are you gonna do about it? I need some help. Okay, here's some opportunity. Here's some others who've done this. So those are the kinds of things that we look to do to ensure that we look at your staff. Is your staff reflective of the community? Is your board reflective of the community? Is your participants reflective of the community? Is it spread across economic lines and racial lines? All of those things are what we look at to ensure that a Y in a community is doing the best to reach more and the most of its constituents from a broader perspective. Those are the kinds of things that we look at.
So, Kevin, how are funders responding to this objective?
What we found, I will tell you, Artie, and this year has been what I would call...
Yeah, we're going to get into that.
I think that what we've been able to do in this year has raised our profile quite a bit. And the other thing that I think is key is that YMCAs are truly American institutions, and they have been ingrained in communities for a long, long, long time. And in most communities, particularly some of our rural and sub-rural communities, the Y is the big institution in that community. And it is drawing quite a bit of leadership and support. So overall, I would say, as I mentioned, there's going to be resistance, because in the Federation and the loyalty that they have to the local YMCA sort of infringes on our ability to use our collective to be much more effective in the kinds of things that we're trying to do. But what we can do is we hold up those entities, those associations that are doing this work at a high level as examples that for we want others to follow. It's always great when I can hold up Artie's YMCA and say, well, Artie's doing it. And I talk about Artie's. I'm not talking about YUSA. I'm talking about Artie's Y and what Artie's doing. And others, and that the best form of flattery, of course, is imitation. And when you're doing something that's successful, garnering significant resources, getting great positive reviews, people want to emulate that. And that's one of the ways that we're able to do that. Shining lights on those individual Ys that are really, really doing exceptional work has been one of the other ways that we're able to move people along that continuum.
Kevin, what do you think the potential is for the Y to help us bridge some of the tremendous gulfs that we have in ideology and political orientation and, a lot of the differences that we seem to have in this country right now, the polarization, I guess people call it.
Yes, good point.
What do you think the Y can do? I mean, given that it's so spread out across the nation and in so many different communities, is there anything that we might get from the Y that can give us a signal of hope that we can begin to bridge some of this, that we can talk to each other at least?
Great question, Artie. I think we have an opportunity, but I would also say a responsibility to use our scale and leverage for the good of all. And let me give you some examples where I see that we've been effective at this. I'm hopeful because of our ability to engage young people in our organization. To me, they are, and we talk about them being change makers to create the communities we all want to live in. First of all, they're very diverse, much more diverse than we've ever been as young folks. Secondarily, most of them do not come with some of the preconceived hangups that we've had growing up. Third, when I get them together, we do youth and government programs for people from all over the country. These are folks are 16, 15, 16, 17. And the way they connect, the way they respond, the commonality among the issues that they care about, how they express that, gives me significant hope that the next generation will be very different about how we address the issues of systemic racism and the partisanship that exists in our country. I see them being very different than what we were growing up in the 60s. In fact, when I've talked about what happened this summer with the George Floyd and all those other issues, one of the things, and I was pretty clear, I said, growing up in South Philly in 1967, I looked out and watching the riots and things that went on and the protest marches, it was mostly 99% of the folks were people of color. And we haven't done enough since then. I'm frustrated, sad, angry, all of those things. But when I saw what was coming about this summer, when I looked at those folks out there, when they talked about Black Lives Matter, it wasn't just Black folks. It was a rainbow coalition of young people talking about that. That gives me hope. And at the Y, because we do so much, not only nationally, Artie, but internationally with young people, it really, really gives me hope about opportunities that can happen because of those relationships and our ability to bring people together from all backgrounds. I was in London because we celebrated 175th anniversary of the Y. And we had over 5,000 young folks there from all over the world. These were people under 24. And to see how they interacted, the commonality that they had, they're caring about issues around the environment, about racial justice. I mean, mental health for young folks. And all of these were common among folks from everywhere. It's given me hope. And it was the Y that got these 5,000 young people from all over the world together. So I think we have an opportunity, but I would even go more to say a responsibility to use that to help foster the kind of communities and world that we want to be. That's why I'm hopeful. I have the utmost, I tell folks all the time, Mr. Morton hired me as a youth director in 1978. I'm still a youth director at heart. I just get paid a little bit more money.
Paid a little bit more money. Well, thank goodness for that. Because I know you weren't making a whole lot of money then.
Oh, man.
People don't understand.
No, I was working for free almost.
Yeah. Right.
I could play basketball anytime I wanted because I had the keys to the gym.
You had the keys to the gym. You had free basketball. So, Kevin, this hasn't been an easy year for lots of organizations and for lots of people, for that matter. The pandemic has had a crushing effect on our physical well-being, our emotional well-being, and probably even our spiritual well-being. And, those are some of the three tenets of the why, right? The why is all about physical, spiritual, and emotional, right?
Correct.
And mind, body, spirit is what.
That's right. You remembering well, Artie.
Yeah, that's right. So we have a pandemic that is, I think, wreaking havoc on all three of those for many people. And yet the why has had to adjust and adapt in its own right to deal with what essentially is a brick and mortar business or brick and mortar operation that people couldn't use anymore because of the COVID pandemic. What have you done? I mean, how has the why managed, or maybe not managed in some cases because some things may have been out of your control? What are we looking at right now, Kevin, with the why? What are you dealing with? What's keeping you up at night? What are your leaders around the country doing to try to keep this thing going through this tough period?
Artie, like most nonprofit organizations, we were devastated by COVID-19. COVID-19, the pandemic became a significant economic crisis, and couple that with racial injustices that came about. It was a significant experience that has wreaked havoc on our organization. March 10th, we had a meeting at our offices in Chicago, and we decided that day to close our offices the next day. I put out a memo to the YMCAs. Rarely do I put something out that this strong. I recommended that they close. I got a lot of pushback from that because that was, as you said, the way they made their resources was because of the physical locations. But that was like Thursday. Monday, 95% of the Ys have been mandated to close because of the pandemic. So I will never say I was proven right, but I'll leave it alone for the time being. But it was really a very difficult process for us. April, just to give you an example of what that meant to the organization, closing the YMCAs in April was about a $400 million hit of revenue across the movement.
1 month.
1 month.
Wow.
We were concerned about summer camp. So between May and August, that was another $1.5 billion of potential lost revenue because we weren't sure we were going to be able to do camp. But I got to tell you, I attacked it in 4 ways, Artie. The first was we set up a rapid response team at YUSA to ensure that we were getting information that was significant, that was from great sources, CDC, federal government, health associations, to ensure YMCAs understood how they needed to operate. 2, we got, as you probably are aware, connected with all the not-for-profits groups in the country to put forth a full press advocacy campaign on the federal government. Because I knew that there was no way we could replace this revenue through philanthropic means. We had to get significant government revenue. That was the only source that could replace that revenue. So we partnered with all the non-for-profits in DC and put forth a hardcore press. 3rd, I talked to all of our partners, our philanthropic partners, as we could, particularly those that had significant resources, were giving us significant resources to release us from those grant criteria so we can use those resources unrestricted to support our YMCAs through this process. And the 4th thing that we did is, based on my good friend and our good friend, Bob Johansson, we put together a planning group to have movement conversations with the movement because we were thinking about now, future, next. You got to have that conversation now to figure out what the future's going to look like so you can predict your next move. And we started that in the midst of the pandemic. Crazy as it sounds, people are like, We can't wait till the pandemic's over to decide how we're going to move forward. We got to start that now. Got a lot of pushback from that, but we had over 2,000 people as part of those conversations. And now we got some idea about where we can go. So what came out of that? I would say, one, as you probably know, we were able to get some significant resources to the organization through the relief program. We had over about 270 Ys get money, 600 Ys get money from the PPP program. And that was somewhere in the neighborhood of $260 million. Two, we get our money at YUSA through dues. They pay us dues every year. Right. We waived 2 months of dues, which for us was about $14 million. So we get $7 million a month from the Ys across the country. So we did that. Third thing that we did is, and this is the big part from programmatic stuff, we pivoted. We pivoted as an organization. We focused on doing essential childcare across the country to ensure that those workers could go to work. We had 1,200 YMCAs across the country, 1,200 spots across the country where we were doing essential childcare. Much of it, some of it free, and much of it supported by the local health workers and firemen and police could go to work. We did essential childcare. And we had to make sure kids, they didn't go to school, so we stood up some after-school programs as well. The other thing that we did is we started to get heavily engaged in food distribution because as many kids were out of school, they weren't getting any food at all. So we stood up food, and we had 1,000 YMCAs across the country doing food distribution in partnership with others. Just to give you an example of what that meant, in the course of a full year, we probably do somewhere about 25 million meals. Between April and August, we did 37 million.
Wow.
So what that did for us, Artie, it really, and then we did partnerships with hospitals to help them with the COVID relief stuff because we had places to put patients and stuff. We worked with the American Red Cross to help do blood distribution. We made phone calls to our senior members because of the social isolation stuff that was going on. We did some of that. Artie, it helped position us as an organization that was a vital community asset. And we got significant philanthropic dollars locally and nationally because of that work. So that's what really got us through that. But that didn't complete the devastation because I will tell you, at YUSA, we laid off 45% of our team.
Wow.
And most of our YMCAs, anywhere between 60 and 70% of their staffs were laid off, furloughed.
Wow.
And just to give you an example, some of our Ys, our largest Y has an operating budget of $250 million. They expect to be somewhere around 80 by the end of the year.
Wow. So
it was devastating. Ys had to pivot, and we see light at the end of the tunnel for 2021, but getting through 2021 is still going to be difficult because there is no, and I talked to our organization, there will be no pre-COVID return anytime soon, if it ever. And so part of the pivoting is understanding what's the sustainability pattern going to look like moving forward. Now, Ys are open. Yeah. But most Ys are open. I think we got 95% or 96% of them open, although some of them will start to close down. And the coast, they're starting to close back down because of the COVID spread again. But even when the ones were open, we were only, I think the best Y was seeing somewhere around 45%, 50% of people coming back in. People just aren't ready for those kinds of issues now. So it's still a struggle to get to where we need to get to. We had some great pivoting, but that pivoting is not going to sustain us over time. So we're still in what I would call a very difficult stage at this point.
Kevin, what do you see for the Y? You mentioned Bob Johansson, our friend, and Bob's philosophy is to have full spectrum thinking and to look to the future to find out what you should do today.
Right.
What do you see in the future, and what's that telling you in terms of what you need to be doing today?
The equity issue is going to be a big one for us. How we approach that collectively, how we partner to do that, how we position to do that can be a big one for us. And then the partnerships in health space with organizations like hospitals, but more importantly, some of our larger drug companies that we can partner with to help deliver some things in communities. We still do great work in some of the diabetes space. Child development services are still going to be large. That's not going to go away. I do think that we're going to have some significant I wouldn't say competition, but people into the market with the mirror and Peloton and all those things, because people's behavior has changed as a result of the pandemic. And that is going to take off some of the folks who would normally come to our organization. I think we got to be less dependent on place. And I mean that from the standpoint of we don't need to own or build facilities anymore. Partnership with schools, churches, and others we can be able to deliver without owning. Because that has been, if you want to ask what has been our biggest issue, is we think about our ability to move forward and do some of the great work we want to do. The economic issues associated with significant amounts of debt that the organization has when they built those facilities, it's tying our hands because you can't run away from the bank. And most of them aren't paid for.
Right.
So that debt that's big in our organization is really, really keeping us from doing some of the things we'd love to do, but the economics said we can't do them because you got this big debt here. So that is a big issue for us. And so I would suspect we're going to see some disillusion of that. We're going to see some properties get sold and get contributed to other entities because we got to release ourselves from the real estate restrictions that have been hampering our organization.
That's going to be obviously a challenge.
It is.
People tend to not want to see change. And even a little thing like Zoom, we talk about how Zoom has changed the world because now we're doing so much virtually. But if we didn't have Zoom, where would we be right now? How would
exactly.
I mean, how would we even be living our lives, it seems? Exactly. We would have very little social interaction. But now that we have this, we've begun to adapt to it, right? And so that opens up other kinds of possibilities. And I suspect for the Y, an organization that has been one thing for so long, this major pandemic and the fact that you had to close and lose revenues and lay off people, now you're starting to begin to adjust to a new normal. Yes. And it's hard to go back from there if you've lived in that new normal for some period of time. So one of the things you said, though, and I just wanted to ask you, on the diversity question, there are ways of looking at it where people will say it's just the right thing to do. But I think a lot of business people would say it's not only the right thing to do, it's the business thing to do. Have you seen that in the Y? Is there a business case that the Y makes for greater diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Absolutely. When you think about it, we're no different than some of the for-profit businesses. If you think about talent in and of itself, right, that comes into any organization, the more diverse you are in your thinking, in your recruiting, you're going to get better decisions making in the more diverse environment. And the other part, talent for volunteering and philanthropy. And you've seen it. I've seen it, particularly in this year of the election. I've seen so many powerful minority groups who have come out and created these significant funds to fund causes or politicians that they care about. Think about what Stacey Abrams has done in Georgia. Yeah. Think about what what was I reading the other day? These 6 women have come together to form this pact there is substantial wealth out there for people of all perspectives. And if they don't think that you are taking that into perspective when you do organization and talent and development, you're missing a lot. Black philanthropy is not, although you and I both know the church gets probably the largest share of Black philanthropy, there's still a lot out there. And we need to be reminiscent and understand that. So we need to go after that. And so, yes, there's a business case for that. Talent comes in all forms, shapes, and colors. I'm glad to hear you say that about going after it, because we've done some studies, Kevin. We call them donor trust reports that show a disproportionately poor amount of attention goes to generating grants and donations from people of color. Yeah. That many of them have said, we'd like to be asked. I know. Organizations haven't been organized in such a way that they go after that.
they think that, well, we got to keep going after what's worked. We don't have the time, money, and energy to go after this new market because we're going to have to do things differently. We have to like appeal to them in a different way, maybe than
exactly.
We have others.
I think the other thing is, Artie, is this. When you think about the number of people, and I think you brought this up, but I know the Chronicle of Philanthropy did. How many people of color are in the developmental field or in leaders of positions? I mean, they're not there.
Yeah, that's right.
And that is a big miss for all of us in this environment.
Yeah, you made that case. I mean, in philanthropy, foundation boards are abysmal across the board in terms of having people of color in leadership and on those boards. And so that has to change. I've written about that, as you know, in Forbes.
Yep.
That, the stat that I got was from a board source study that demonstrated that out of 111 foundations surveyed, 44 of them had 100% all white boards. And, my reaction was, fine, if you want to continue to operate like that, then we should remove your tax exemption, because why should taxpayers of diverse backgrounds be subsidizing you through the tax code to remain all white in your boards?
Exactly.
And so, hey, let's be for real here. Let's be fair. But we'll see where all that goes. But I just think that you're right. There is a business case, and good foundations are seeing that. Good organizations like yours are beginning to see it. And I know you're going to have to push, but I think you'll ultimately get there. Well, look, Kevin, it's been about an hour, man, and I've really loved this. And I know you got to get back to work. You got a lot of big things going, and I can't thank you enough, not only for doing this, but just for our lifelong friendship. Your brother and I played ball together in high school, so we go back a long way. I just can't be impressed enough with everything you're doing. And you've been, for our community, a terrific role model, a great friend, and accessible. And I hope you're able to continue that as you do this important work. The Y has certainly placed the right person in the right place at the right time. And, Sonny would always say that. You got to be at the right place at the right time.
Oh, Sonny.
Sonny Hill. So listen, Kevin, I appreciate you, and more to come. And I hope that all of you listening will share this with others so that they can hear this wonderful testimony about how to lead in a very difficult time. So this is the Heart of Giving podcast, powered by bbbgive.org. I'm Art Taylor, and I hope you'll join us for our next episode.
You've just listened to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor. Be sure to tune in next time for a brand new episode. To listen to our other interviews, visit heartgiving.podbean.com. That's heartgiving.podbean.com. Subscribe to our show on major podcast platforms. Send your comments and ideas to Nona at thusmarket.com. That's Nona at thusmarket.com. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this podcast are the views and opinions of the guests, not those of the BBBY's Giving Alliance or program affiliates. This podcast is for information and educational purposes only and is copyrighted with all rights reserved. This podcast is protected by Podbean's terms of service.